Growing up, we had an old farmhouse. It was about 100-something years old, and so the electrical system was a little outdated in that house. Of course, it was built before there was electricity in there, and it was wired after the fact. And I remember the days when you would run something in the house, and all of a sudden, the device would go off. The lights would go out. So you'd have to go down to the basement, you'd open this little box, and you unscrew this thing that had a base, sort of like a light bulb, little clear glass piece in there, and you pull that out because what had you done? You'd blown a fuse. Now, I'm thankful that my house right now does not have fuses, but we do have breakers. And, in our kitchen, we found that you are maxed out with 2 and sometimes 3 high drain appliances. So if we've got the Vitamix blender going and the microwave going, you got to be real careful about running that toaster oven at the same time. Okay, because they're all in the same circuit, and it's going to trip something if you run too many at the same time. Too much can overwhelm you. It can blow the circuit. It can. There's only so much capacity that can be held. For us, there is only so much up here in our heads that we can comprehend. And sometimes we get a little bit overwhelmed by how much is going on up there. When we try and ponder, we try and comprehend something that is beyond us. If you've been to the Grand Canyon and you stand there, you've been to the mountains, or you've been beside the ocean and you stand and you look out, it makes you feel really small. And when you try and ponder that, or you look up at night and you look at the stars, it's like, wow, that's overwhelming to me. David in the Psalms often feels overwhelmed. And we are going to see this morning in Psalm 139 that he feels very overwhelmed, not just like by nature or by these experiences, but he feels overwhelmed by who God is. I really appreciated the song that was selected, How Great Is Our God, this morning, because that's what we're going to be talking about. How great and how amazing our God is. So turn to Psalm 139 if you would, and we're going to be walking through the entirety of the psalm, and we're going to start with it in verse 1. And we're going to read verses 1 through 6 for starters. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thought from afar. You scrutinize my path and my lying down. You are intimately acquainted with all my ways. Even before there's a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You have enclosed me behind and before. You laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain to it. His mind is blown as he tries to comprehend how it is that God knows all that stuff. Now, when I really enjoyed it when we were sitting at the table one time, and one of my kids, I don't remember which one it was, they grabbed a bottle or box of some food that was sitting on the table, and they read through the list of ingredients. It's like, oh, okay, flour, sugar, big word, big word, big word. Potato starch, big word, big word, big word. Yellow number 5, big word, big word. And you go through that thing, and it's like they can't pronounce so many of these words when they were smaller because, most of us can't pronounce them either, right? It's all this chemical-y type of stuff, or it's this scientific names for the ingredients, okay? They're real things, but they have these big words to describe them. This morning, we are going to tackle 3 big words, all right? Big words that we don't typically use, but they are descriptive of who God is. So you'll find these kind of words in commentaries and Bible dictionaries and stuff, but they're not words that are part of our normal conversation. But the concepts that they describe are incredibly important for us to understand. Okay? So the first one of these big words is the word omniscience. And that's what has been described for us here in verses 1 through 6. Omniscience. Omniscience is a fancy way of saying all-knowing. Okay? The science part is about knowledge, and omni just means all. Okay? God has omniscience. He knows everything. Now, as we go through this, we're going to be taking the big word, but we're going to bring it down to personal. Because David, though I'm sure he didn't use a big word like that, he understood what this meant. And that's the fact that God knows me. God knows all. He knows everything, but that means that he also knows me. Now, for each aspect of God's character, it is going to evoke a response from us. Now, the response that it evokes from us is largely going to be depending on what our relationship with him is. So the fact that God knows me can be incredibly comforting. In the midst of all my trial, I'm sorry, I'm getting an echo here, Jay. In the midst of all my trial and difficulty, He knows what I'm going through. He knows my weaknesses and he knows my stumblings. He knows my fears. God knows me. That can be a great comfort because he's my Father. But if I am not in a close relationship with God, if I'm not a follower of Jesus, if I'm a follower but I've been straying away from him, the fact that God knows all, that can be really disconcerting, right? Like when a child is, you know that they've done something wrong, you're like, look me in the eyes. You know, I want you to make this connection. You can tell that they're squirming. They don't want to. They don't want to be under that scrutiny. The fact that God knows me can be really scary if I'm walking in disobedience to him. So, I want you to gauge your emotions for a second. Now, it's impossible for me to make eye contact with all of you. But if I look you in the eye and I say, God knows you. God knows what you're thinking. God knows where you've been. Okay, if I look you in the eye and I say that, what is your emotional response? Because that's going to be indicative of your relationship with God. Because if I do that and I say, God knows you, and you exhale, the tension drains out of your shoulders. Yeah, God knows me. That's probably indicative that indicates that you and him have a good relationship. But if I look you in the eye and say, God knows you, and suddenly you tense up, and your breathing gets a little bit fast, and you start to sweat, okay, that might indicate that your relationship with God isn't what it's supposed to be. So what is your response when you hear that God knows you? We each long to be in good relationships, okay, humanly speaking, and also in relationship with God. We long for that, but there are times that we run away from that which we long for because of the fact that we're scared. Some of us have been hurt in relationships, and so we don't desire to have that closeness. You know, we think of the word intimacy and closeness and tenderness and stuff of relationship, and we're like, I would really love to have that. But I tried that before and I got burned. I got hurt. And so what happens when a person tries to get close, we're like, okay, that's close enough. Thank you, no closer, please. And we do the same with God. Yes, I want to have that, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid because I might get hurt through it. And so what we end up doing is we try and keep our distance from God. God, I want you to be close, but I don't really want you to be close. I want you to know me, but I'm afraid if you know me, you're going to reject me. And so we flee, we run from God. And that's exactly what David does. Look at verses 7 through 12. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, which is a word for the grave, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remotest part of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand will lay hold of me. If I say, surely the darkness will overwhelm me, and the light around me will be night, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is as bright as the day. Darkness and light are alike to you. So this is a statement of God's omnipresence. He is present everywhere. Okay, he goes through these different extremes of where can I go to hide. You know, if I go up to heaven, if I go down to Sheol, which is not just like in the 6 foot in the grave, but the abode of the dead, you know, after you die, where the souls of people go. Extreme high, extreme low. The wings of the dawn, where does the sun rise? In the east. Okay, in Israel, where is the sea? In the west. If I go as far east as I can, go as far west as I can, anywhere I go, you are there, Lord. I cannot run away from you. This is a reminder that God pursues me. God pursues me. He is after you. Now, as an unbeliever, a person who has not yet given their life to the Lord, God is pursuing. He's going after you. He is coming because he longs to draw you into a relationship to fix your sin problem that has separated you from him. But even those of us who are believers, sometimes we run from God, either because of our disobedience or our fear or our distraction. I mean, you've all seen little kids, they'll run away from something that makes them afraid, but they'll also run after something that's of interest to them. And we're just like that. I get distracted and I'm going after something else. We run away from God, whether on purpose or accidentally, but God still pursues us. He is in the business of continually pursuing us until he finds us. But you know what? If I can't run from God, maybe I can hide from him, right? The dark. Can I find a dark place? Can I go someplace where God will not see me? We need to remember that God has night vision. You guys ever use those night vision goggles or something like that, where you look and you can see because it's the infrared or it's the thermal imaging, and it kind of looks a little bit different for us, where everything's kind of black and white or green and white, and it still allows us to see what's going on. God has perfect night vision. He sees just as well in the dark as he does in the light. There's no way that we are going to be able to hide from him. And we need to realize that. We can run, we can hide, but you cannot outrun and you cannot outhide God. He will always pursue, and he will always come after you to find you. But this is not something that should make us afraid, because there's tenderness in this passage as well. Okay? Did you happen to notice earlier on that it talked about how God's hand would be on him, and how here your hand will guide me? God is there in personal terms, touching. And there's a very visual feel here. His eye is on you. His eye sees you. And there it says that the darkness doesn't interfere with his ability to see. He touches. He sees. He is present. And even his face is there. If you look in verse 7, it says, or where can I flee from your presence? At least that's what my translation says. Literally, where can I flee from your face? God is right there. He's in front of you. He's looking for you. And he wants you to see him. He is not about the business of hiding from us. He is pursuing you. So what do we need to do with the truth of God's omnipresence? We need to stop running. We stop hiding and stop resisting and let God catch you. Let God embrace you. If you have been running from him, it's time to say, I'm putting the brakes on. I'm going to stop and I'm going to turn and say, I give up. I cry, uncle, you found me. And let God embrace you. Let him love you. Don't be afraid to grow close to God and to let him embrace you that way. Now, when we start verse 13, the first word there is the word for. For. And this connects what we just read with what we are about to read. Because David is assured there of God's omnipotence. God's omnipotence, okay? And that means that he is all-powerful. Now, we're going to read this. This is going to explain why I chose this psalm for this Sunday. Okay, because this is not just because we're in a series of messages on the Psalms. It's because this Sunday is a very important Sunday. Actually, because yesterday was the anniversary of something. Back in 1973, on January 22nd, was when Roe versus Wade was decided, okay, which legalized abortion across our country. And since then, over 60 million babies have been murdered in the womb as a result of that. And there's a mindset that goes with this, or a type of logic. And it's a logic that says that a woman has a right. A woman has a right to choose, and she has a right to choose not to be pregnant because it's her body. Right? And since she is an individual and she is a human with human rights, then you cannot cross those rights. And what is growing inside of her womb is not a human. It is not a person, and therefore does not have the same rights that she has. Since it is not a person, then it does not have to be dealt with as a person growing inside of her. And there was, in the Roe versus Wade controversy there back in 1973, the state of Texas, I think it was, said, no, a fetus is a person. And of course, the majority of justices in a 7-2 decision said that no, a fetus is not a person. Therefore, under the 14th Amendment, it does not have the rights of a person, the human rights, the civil rights that are granted to all American citizens. All right? Now, I want you to see what Justice Blackmun said here. If this suggestion of personhood is established, the appellant's case, of course, collapses, for the fetus's right to life would then be guaranteed specifically by the amendment. So if it can be demonstrated that what is growing inside of the mother is actually a human child, then, and it is a person, then that person would have rights and could not be killed. And so that is actually what is coming up before the Supreme Court this year, or has come up actually. The decision has not been rendered yet, but the arguments have already been made. And so there's the possibility that this year, Roe versus Wade might get overturned. And we need to be praying very hard along those lines. Now, that does not mean abortion would end. It means that it would go back to the states to decide individually. It doesn't mean that it would be illegal nationally. It just would mean that it's not legalized nationally. So we need to pray along those lines. Now, on that point, though, technology has advanced a lot since then. Okay? The whole thing of ultrasounds, that you can see inside the womb, and now there's even 4D ultrasounds where you can kind of see in a three-dimensional moving view, and all the different prenatal tests. And of course, babies can be born very premature now and still survive outside of the womb. And so it's going back farther and farther towards the moment of conception and demonstrating that this is really a real person. But even without imaging technology, David, thousands of years ago, had no doubt about that. He didn't need some group of experts or technology to prove that what is growing in the womb is not a what, but a who. But a whom is growing in the womb. And I want you to read now verses 13 through 16. Verses 13 to 16. You formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written. The days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. God made me. God made me. We need to know that through his omnipotence, he made me. And something else that I didn't actually put up on here because it's not really a theological term as far as I know, okay, is that God is also, and this is just, I made up this word, okay, he's omnitemporal, okay, temporal has to do with time, and God is outside of time. He's not just everywhere, he's every when. In the past, the present, the future, God is in all of those places. And so David can look back, God, you formed me in the womb, in the past, and you ordained the days that were going to be of my life. You know how many days I'm going to live on this earth before they even happen. When we look at this, this should give us an incredible sense of specialness. You've all been to craft shows before, right? Okay, with a church or a place sets up, fairgrounds, there's booths that are set up and tables, and a person shows their wares that they have done. It might be a knitting that they've done, carving, painting, glassware, any number of things that a person has made, and they put them out on display. And what's special about going to a craft show? It's because of the fact that each one of these things is unique that a person has made. It's not like it's some mass-produced widget on a machine controlled by a computer overseas someplace that got shipped to a big box store here. These are handcrafted, lovingly made, and individually each piece is unique. Did you notice in this passage how God made us? He knit us together. I am skillfully wrought or created, handmade, hand-tooled, unique. There is no one else that is like you. God made you one of a kind. And if he's going to give that much care to you in your creation, will he not also give you that much care in your life and taking care of you also? Now, I know that most of you here, I would assume all of you, are what we would call pro-life. Okay, you understand that the baby born in the womb is a person in the image of God, is worthy of protection and care and tenderness. And so we apply these words here to that. But I want to ask you, do you view yourself that way? Do you view yourself with the same value that you would place on that unborn life? Do you take the truths that we just read in these 4 verses and apply them to you? Okay, so let's go through these just a minute, and I want to build for you a picture of your value in God's sight, okay? So God formed your inward parts, and he knit you together in your mother's womb. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. That's amazing. And what does it say in verse 14, the second line there? Wonderful are your works. Does your soul know that really well? If you are made by God, you are one of God's works, and that means you are wonderful. We hear all kinds of lies that bombard us. I'm dumb. I'm stupid. I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. I'm not lovely enough. I'm ugly. I need to be skinnier. I need to be stronger. I need to be richer. All of these things that the world uses to assign value to us or to rank us. And God says, He made you wonderful. There's always going to be somebody that's stronger or taller or has more hair or nicer hair or has more money or more freedom, or you could find whatever category you want to compare yourselves with other people. But God made you individually, and He made you wonderful. And that is why you are so valuable. If you ever hear Satan's lies, no matter how they come to you, just whispered in your head, in your mind, they come to you through billboards, they come to you through another person, go back here and read those 4 verses, especially verse 14. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. I know it, God. I am your child. You have handmade me, and so I know that I am valuable. The truth of God's omnipotence, that He can do all things, it's great, and we need to anchor ourselves in that, but make it personal. That means that you made me too, God. You were powerful enough to make me however you wanted, and you made me like this. And I'm going to give you thanks for who you have made me to be. Ephesians 2, verse 10. We are God's workmanship. You're God's masterpiece, His handcrafted person. You are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for you to do. You are God, and that word is actually poema. It's like where we get our word poem. You're God's artistic expression. He made you to do good works for Him. That sets your worth, not the world around us. Now, we talked about how David was overwhelmed by these things. As I look at the fact that you know all and you know me, that you are present everywhere and you're present here with me. You can do all and you made me. And it's blowing his mind. Okay? There's a phrase that's kind of going around where somebody learns something new and what do? Mind blown. They're just saying, wow, you just scrambled my categories. You just made me understand something I didn't understand before. David thinks on who God is, mind blown. And now he's going to talk about God's thoughts. I'm thinking on your thoughts, God. And here's what I want to say. Look at verses 17 and 18. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I should count them, they would outnumber the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. David is loving God's thoughts. He is loving God's thoughts. I treat them as precious, God. What you're thinking, what's on your mind and your heart, I'm going to treat that as precious. Love God's thoughts. But I want you to prepare, okay? Sometimes when I drive with my kids, I'm like, there's traffic coming. I'm like, I want to make the turn. I'm like, okay, guys, hard left. Hold on, and yank it around the corner. We are about to take a hard left here. But understand, this is still part of the same psalm, and I think you'll understand why in just a minute, okay? So I want to read with you verses 19 through 22. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, men of bloodshed, for they speak against you wickedly, and your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with the utmost hatred. They have become my enemies. Here we see that David is linking with God's thoughts. He's linking himself with God's thoughts. Now, don't think of what David is saying here as some Pharisee looking down his nose at other people, oh, you terrible sinners. He's looking at people who are setting themselves in opposition to God. And David knows who God is. He's just spent all this time thinking on who God is and admiring God and getting himself in tune with God. And now he can't understand, why would anybody set themselves up against you? And so God, you view them as your enemies. And so I'm going to adopt your view of them as well. And when we link ourselves with God, we link our thoughts with God's thoughts, we are going to start to view things from his perspective. God, if you call this holy, I'm going to regard this as holy. If that unborn life is precious to you, I'm going to see it as precious. If those people are your enemies, they're going to be my enemies too. I'm going to view reality through your view, God, and think your thoughts about all this that's around me. And the way that we do that is by getting into the scriptures and saturating ourselves with God's word, and also focusing ourselves on thinking on God, just like David's done. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to focus myself and ruminate on who you are, God. And the more we get to know God, the more that we are going to think his thoughts. Those of you who have been married a long time, you can understand. You can finish your partner's, your spouse's sentences, right? You know what they're thinking. You can tell where they're going. And if outside observers might think, you guys are nuts. How did you just know that she was talking about that or that he was referencing this? Because of the fact that you have spent so much time together. Spend time with God and you're going to start thinking his thoughts. Saturate yourself in his word and you're going to start thinking right along with him. Interpret the reality around you through his eyes. But then also, we see David lining up with God's thoughts. And this is in the final two verses. He is lining up with God's thoughts. Verses 23 and 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there is any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. Remember, he started this. You have searched me and known me, back in verse 1. And here he's saying, search me, God. Know me. Try me. Sift me. I want you to examine me. In school, none of us like to take tests. None of us like the dreaded pop quiz that comes. And here David's placing himself before God and he's saying, God, I want you to examine me. Where am I falling short? Because David wants to walk in the everlasting way. He wants to walk God's path and do things God's way. So he longs to obey. God, I see who you are and I want to please you. I want to follow you. But he also realizes he cannot do that on his own. If you love God and want to obey him, that is great. But realize there's no way that you can do that apart from the empowering work of his Holy Spirit or the examining work of his Holy Spirit. Because there's no way that we can find all of our faults on our own. Back a number of years ago, I was at Walmart, I believe it was, and Amanda and I did the divide and conquer thing. Okay, you go and look for this, I'm going to go and look for that. Well, I was looking for a vacuum cleaner. And so I was searching and looking around for a vacuum cleaner, and I could not for the life of me find where those things were in Walmart. And I ran into a friend from church. Her name's Julie. And I said, she's like, oh, what you doing? I'm looking for a vacuum cleaner, but I can't seem to find him. She's like, you man looked. All right? And she just stated it like it was. You man looked. She knew. She'd been married for a long time. You know, her husband. You didn't just look. You looked like a man looks. All right? That's why you couldn't find it. You're deficient because you man looked. And then she took me right to where the vacuum cleaners were and showed me where they were. Right? When we go to look at ourselves and examine ourselves for sin, just like me in Walmart, you're just man looking. Or you're just woman looking. You're not God looking. You're human looking there. And there's no way that you are going to find everything that you need to look for, everything that you're searching for, because we self-deceive. We're imperfect. There's no way that we imperfect people can find all of our sin and root it out. God, examine me. I can't tell. I can't tell what's on the inside. You know, Bob's going in for a test this week. You guys have all been in for different oscopies and scans and things like that. You know, there's no way that you have the tools, the technology, or the training to be able to examine all the stuff that's on the inside. You need somebody to help you. God, search me and know me. I want to be pure and righteous before me. Open me up. Look on the inside. There's no way that I can do it on my own. So as you take this psalm, and we can begin preparing for our closing song. As you take this psalm and look at God, it always should bring us back to looking at ourselves as well. Anytime we encounter God in his holiness, his omnipotence, his omniscience, his omnipresence, the greatness of who God is, it always puts it in perspective. Just like when you stand by the mountain, you stand by the ocean, it makes you feel small. it makes you feel inadequate. When we stand in the presence of God, it should make us feel incredibly inadequate. There's no way, God, that I can measure up to your standard. And even though I want to walk in the everlasting way, there's no way that I can see all of my sin to be rid of it. God, examine me, help me, purify me. So take this time as we have this closing song to do two things. To turn your attention towards God, and as he becomes big in your eyes, cry out to him and say, God, help me. I want to be holy in your sight. Examine me. Search me and know me so that I can be led in the everlasting way.